Hello, everyone. This is Allison Gross, and I'm sitting in a chair with my computer on a stand in the middle of nowhere because I can't get it to work on a couch because the lighting is really bizarre today. We have like 90 degrees with like 80 plus humidity, and it's gonna storm at any minute. And my face looks orange again. I don't know why. It's not actually orange. It just somehow the lighting in this room does that. And just even moving away from the couch, I have like central air in my house, and even with that, it's so hot that unless I sit in the spot where like three vents converge, it's too hot today. So, today I wanted to talk about. Basically, I read something that, in the words of my best friend in college, she would say, like, if she found something that she thought would make me really angry, she was like, "This will make you spit nails." And yeah, that's about what this happened. So this has to do with. I'm going to talk somewhat about, like, my gender identity and how this relates to my religion and stuff. So I didn't really understand myself in terms of gender until I met Fornius, because he's like the perfect match for me. And he's completely unself-conscious about it. So the problem is that I've always basically been I'm not going to say I'm comfortable with having a female body. I mean, there's things I don't like about it, mostly related to childbearing or to the unpleasant side effects of not having children, which apparently for me are a lot worse than they are for a lot of women. I don't know. Some women are like, yeah, it's nothing. But as far as, everything beyond that, it's what I've always known. It seems normal to me. I have no desire to be in a man's body. However, I mean, in a very crude sense, you might describe me as like a male soul in a female body or something. My exterior is pretty much 100% female. I mean, on a daily basis wear less makeup than a lot of women. I put this on today because I was recording and I am looking kind of scruffy because it's really hot out here, which sucks. And I will wear clothes that, emphasize my curves, which I don't have much of. Less often than a lot of women. But I mean, when I want to go out, I will make up and put on heels and a dress and stuff. And I don't have a problem with doing that. The only thing I have a problem with is there being an expectation to do that. However, my personality, I am confrontational and combative. I am aggressive. I am very, I'm even sexually aggressive. Like, I think a lot of my bad luck that I've had with relationships is that I go into relationships like a man, and when the person on the other end is a man, it don't work so good. Unless you find a person, like I have, who's male on the outside and female on the inside, who's the exact complement of me, which is why it works so great. But for somebody who's, male inside as well, being pursued by somebody else who's also male inside is probably not great for them. And like I said, I've talked before about when I was in a relationship with a guy who was sort of a traditional male. Like, we butted heads all the time. We did not get along. Like, we were, we were both trying to be the alpha male all the time. And it really, really did not work. I have no interest in my feminine functions. Like, I don't want to have children. I've never wanted to have children. I would be so much happier if I never menstruated again. Yeah. Especially because it meant that I got, like, no sleep last night, which is putting me in a really cranky mood now. But anyway, but at the same time, like, I do like making myself up and wearing heels and a dress when I want to. I like the fact that I have a female body, if only because that's what I'm used to. It's a very, when I was younger, like when I was like young teenager, I wondered if I was supposed to have been a guy, if I had been born in, like, if I was born in the wrong body. I even, like, when I didn't really understand about anatomy, like, about how, in a way, now that I've learned that there is women have, like, vestigial male whatever or something, but I didn't know that when I was growing up. And I was like, oh my god, I have all this extra stuff here, which I'm trying not to be too explicit, but essentially normal female parts that are part of normal female anatomy are not explained to you in health class. It's just like a hole that they show you, or at least when I was growing up, that's what they showed me. So the fact that it was more complicated than that, I thought was vestigial male parts. And I was like, holy shit, I'm one of those people that came out like an underdeveloped male, and then they made the decision at birth to just have me be female or something, because I had heard that happens to some people. Like, that I thought, because I was confused that I was supposed to have been born male and that they reassigned me to be female and stuff. And then later on into my later teen years, like when I was in high school and stuff, and there was also the fact that, partly because my biggest role model growing up was my brother, I was kind of raised to like male things. I was really into video games and Dungeons and Dragons, and I loved heavy metal and blah, blah, blah. And I was very, very lonely growing up because I couldn't do these things with girls because they didn't want to do them. And I couldn't do these things with boys because they didn't want to do stuff with a girl. So I was basically isolated all the time. But even then it was like, I recognized the fact that I was female, so I wanted a role model that I could. So, like, when I was young, when I was like 6 or something, was when the She-Ra cartoons were out, and I was like, oh my god, it's a strong woman who uses a sword. And I'm like, that's, I can relate to that and everything. So there was a very, I was very sort of gender confused from a young age, though when I look back on it now, I wasn't confused at all. I knew exactly what I wanted from the beginning. I was just confused because society has problems with it. Basically, what I wanted to be is a woman with a quote-quote masculine personality, for the most part. And that, just doesn't fly in a lot of ways. But I mean, the phase where I thought that I, was supposed to be male or whatever, I kind of, got past being in that phase when I started studying paganism when I was in high school, like in my late teens, because I was like, oh my God, this is a religion that's female empowering. That, I don't have to be weak and passive to be female. Which is what I really wanted, was to not feel that pressure. And, I mean, before I officially converted to paganism, I feel like I was unofficially pagan my entire life, because I always, I studied mythology, so I knew about all these deities since I was a child. I was very attracted to nature. I, instinctively tried to do spell work, when I was, a young teen in middle school. I mean, I had no clue what I was doing, but I just had this sense of things that I should do and stuff. But I started and study. I found out that there was an actual modern pagan religion when I was in high school, and I started studying it intensively and officially converted when I was 18. Well, I mean, I had decided that what I wanted to do, but I was still living at home and blah blah blah. And I got, a good, half hour plus that I was alone in the house, assured of, on my 18th birthday. And so I went and did a self-dedication and stuff like that. And I loved the fact that there were, battle goddesses and craft goddesses and goddesses who chose not to have children and goddesses who were rulers and that I had found a religion, so I thought at the time, based on the study of paganism that I did then. And if any of you pagans are watching me, I know you're going to want to slam me, but my introduction to paganism came through Silver Ravenwolf. And I know a lot of people really, really hate Silver Ravenwolf. And there are some things about her that are very flawed, that I have issues with. But this is what I'm going to say. She makes paganism accessible to the modern audience. And I think that her perspectives that she provides are a lot more inclusive than some of the, more respected greats of paganism, which is what I'm going to talk about in this video. I'm talking about this for a long time. That, I felt like it was okay for me to be female and to have those qualities. Because paganism has female deities that have those qualities that I admire and that I want to cultivate in my own life. And so that was that for many years. And then but I had a lot of problems in my marriage, because he never fully accepted that side of me, because it wasn't compatible with his makeup. And then I met Fornius, and it was like the door was just thrown open. And that, because Fornius is essentially the opposite of me. That he's born physically male, and he's okay with that and doesn't really want to change it, but recognizes that who he is inside is predominantly female. But here's the thing, is that for both of us, it's not even, after I met him and he, talked to me about this, and it was so liberating for me, I started researching a lot of stuff about gender identity, and I couldn't really find a word to define, because it isn't, 100% one thing or the other. There is a sliding scale and shifting and blending. We both have days where we feel more male or more female or whatever. Or I suppose I should say more feminine or more masculine, which the concept of femininity and masculinity is one of the things I want to have issue, I want to talk about, because I have a huge issue with it. And for me, especially, it's part of what's important for me is to be able to feel both of those things at the same time. So, and this is, I keep promising I'm going to make a video about me doing aerial at some point. And so I will. But it keeps coming up in tons of different videos because it's really central to my life, and in some ways now aerial is kind of my religion, but that's a whole nother story. But this is the thing, and I have found why aerial and pole dance, which I consider a form of aerial, are so incredibly compelling to me. And why, they have this ability, I feel more in tune with myself and more at peace with myself when I do these activities than at any other time. And it's a very, very simple reason. Because, like me, these are activities that are feminine on the outside and masculine on the inside. These are activities that are primarily done by women. There are men who do them, but the vast majority are done by women, and they are meant to be beautiful and graceful and poised and maybe even a little bit sensual and, all of this stuff. But underneath, there is nothing but raw power. If you do this, if you do these activities, it is, and what is, throughout history, what have been the most, venerated masculine qualities? What are the qualities of a warrior? Strength and courage. And what are the most interesting qualities of doing aerial? Exactly that. Those two qualities will be tested to the limit. And so, for me, doing these activities that, talking about this, I'm almost starting to tear up a little bit, that, aesthetically are considered very feminine, but underneath have this core of qualities that are extremely important to me that have been historically coded as masculine, is so important and so meaningful to me. And so, for me, aerial represents the full integration of myself. But one of the things I wanted to talk about here is the fact that I don't even like using the terms masculine and feminine anymore. I find the idea that coding certain things as masculine and certain things as feminine, I've reached the point where I actually find that kind of insulting. Because the thing is that if I'm I am a woman with masculine qualities, I am strong and brave and aggressive and, active and that's masculine. Even if somebody says it's okay for you to be masculine even though you're a woman, it's still associating femaleness, which I am, with qualities that I find undesirable, and masculine maleness with qualities that I do desire and find admirable that are set apart from me because of the plumbing I was born with. Like, even if they're like, oh, well, you can be a male soul in a female body or whatever, I'm like, I don't want to be male or female, masculine or feminine. I want to be me. I am me. I am a whole integrated individual that happens to have certain qualities. Why do we have to fucking associate these qualities with gender? And the problem that we're going to get into with paganism is that paganism, especially traditional, we're talking back like, you know, stuff that was very heavily influenced by Gerald Gardner. You know, he was the first one that kind of brought it out into the open, and he sort of invented contemporary witchcraft, and it's a long story. But this was one of the things that I, you know, realized when I met Fornius, you know, because he started asking me all these questions about paganism and stuff. And he said, you know, how accepting is paganism about gender identity and everything? And at first I was like, oh yeah, totally, you know, and then I started thinking about it. And I realized that there's some issues here. At least if you take, you know, the traditional Gardnerian model. And the person that I studied under initially was very Gardnerian influenced. He, his first experience was in Gardnerian witchcraft, and he was in a Gardnerian coven for a long time. He may have gone to second degree in it. The problem, and I'm frustrated by the fact that he taught us all this wholesale Gardnerian stuff, because eventually he wasn't kicked out of the Gardnerian coven. Like, Gardnerianism is like, oh, they're like, we don't care if you're homosexual, like, if you're just a regular person. Like, that's fine, we accept everybody. But you can't take the third degree and ascend to the priesthood if you are. Because and this is the thing, you know, paganism traditionally is all about polarity. And in some ways this is a great thing about it. You know, we honor both the light and the dark, both the male and the female. Like, we honor life and death. We honor the creative and the contemplative. In a way, it's saying that all facets of life and existence are good and natural and acceptable. And that's a great thing, but there's a problem with it. And this is the same thing with the yin-yang system in Chinese thought. And there have been various attempts, some more successful than others, to graft that idea onto paganism. The problem with both of these systems is that you have, like, polarity is good, but you have these two long lists of polarities. And when you put male and female in that list, then you are making judgments about gender roles. To a certain extent, that if you put female and passive on the same side of the polarity list, and on the opposite side, and receptive are all on the same side, and projective and active are on the side that doesn't have female on it, you are saying something there. Something that, for me, is really, really not good. And so the argument is that you, in these very, very traditional Gardnerian influenced sects of paganism, there is this big emphasis on polarity, and the idea is there's even some thoughts that say that, you know, a group of witches working together have to have an equal number of men and women to create the polarity. So the problem with that is that you are therefore defining somebody's polarity solely by their genitals. I mean, we've never tried to. I mean, maybe a little bit we have, but for the most part, Fornius and I have never tried to do spell work together. But I think that if we did, it would be great. Because we have a perfectly matched polarity. It just doesn't correspond with our plumbing. And the problem is that in the Gardnerian tradition, to take the third degree and to serve as a priest or a priestess, you have to fully embody the goddess or the god. You have to completely be able to be polarity with the other person or whatever. And their argument was somebody who's homosexual is not 100% male, and therefore you can't fully embody the god, and therefore bye-bye, sorry. And even after that happened, this dude still teaches us all this Gardnerian influence stuff. And, you know, I'm like, that's awful. And that, I mean, learning about that really, really made me think. Because I'm like, okay, if I was in a Gardnerian coven, they would look at me and be like, you look like a woman. You have woman plumbing. You have sex with somebody who has male plumbing. Yeah, you're good. And it's like, no, guys, I'm not good. I'm probably less of a polarity than that dude over there. Like, it's just invisible for me. And I find that really offensive. Like, so anyway, to make a long story much, much longer, you know, so I started talking, you know, trying to answer Fornius' questions about how paganism portrays gender and stuff. And I started thinking about how, you know, traditionally codes everything as masculine and feminine. You know, like this ex-Gardnerian dude, you know, teaches us how to set up the altar. That your right hand is projective and your left hand is receptive because of the direction your blood circulates. And there are two, you know, and so when you set up your altar, you have a god side and a goddess side. And the god side is the right side, and the goddess side is the left side, because the god is projective and the woman is receptive. And the elements are coded masculine and feminine. And so earth and water go on the goddess side, and air and fire, which, by the way, are the elements that I resonate the most to, air being creativity and fire being passion, go on the male side. And yeah. And I mean, that's, you know, if you are saying this is how you should set up your altar, then you're making a statement about how people should perceive gender. Coincidentally, without fully realizing it, when I set up my altar, I do have air and fire on the god side and water and earth on the goddess side. But when I set it up without thinking, I put the goddess side on the right side. And then after he taught this lesson about this, I was like, fuck that, it's staying where it is. Like, I instinctively put it there. It's supposed to be there. You can all go screw yourselves. But, yeah, so recently I've had these books on my reading list for a long time, and a friend offered to lend them to me a couple weeks ago, so I borrowed from her The Witch's Goddess and The Witch's God by Janet and Stuart Farrar. These are some of the big names in paganism of the stuff that they wrote. And I started reading these, and I kind of, you know, in a vacuum, it made me want to forswear my identity as a pagan. It was that offensive to me. I mean, I know, being part of the larger community, that everybody doesn't think like this. These are old books. I was very sad to find out they're not as old as I thought they were. I thought they were from like the 1960s or 1970s. And I was like, okay, I can maybe forgive the gender rigidity in that case. Nope. Witch's Goddess is from 87, and Witch's God is from 89. Yeah. I'm very fortunate that I have a friend who's very active in the pagan community, and she's also very active in the local like alternative art community. Like, she has a lot of friends there, and a lot of them are like transgendered and stuff. And so she talks a lot about this kind of stuff, and so I'm able to know that these ideas are certainly not pervasive anymore, which is extremely comforting to me. But that, you know, in a traditional like pagan ritual, you invoke the goddess and the god, and she didn't come up with this, but she taught me this system. Apparently it was invented by this guy called Eric Eldritch, from something called the Radical Fairy Tradition. I actually met this guy a few months ago, and he's like pretty cool and stuff. But this idea was brilliant, that he came up with this system where instead of invoking the goddess and the god, you invoke male, female, both, and neither. And that, you know, it's very meaningful to me that that's a thing that some people are starting to do. So anyway, I wanted to talk about what's going on in these two Farrar books, because they're really kind of like one book. They're two sides of the polarity, and like why it bothers me so much, and etc. So let's see. Yes. So the first thing we're gonna do is talk about. Well, one of the things that pisses me off is that I feel that they're kind of hypocritical about stuff in a lot of ways. But one thing is they talk about how there are all these different deities, and how all the deities are sort of aspects of the one creative principle, and we break it into different god forms because it allows humans to conceptualize it better. And there are many different ways to invoke the different principles of the ultimate divine, blah, blah, blah. And they talk about that, and then they say, what matters is that our choice should be individual and not dictated to us from outside. Yeah. And then proceed to spend the entire rest of this book, this is the God book that came second, doing exactly that. Which also followed on the previous book, where they also spent the whole book doing exactly that. So screw that. So yeah, they have very clear ideas about things. So they talk about the masculine principle here. What do we mean by the masculine principle? Briefly, we would say that it represents the linear, logical, analyzing, fertilizing aspect with its emphasis on ego consciousness and individuality. While the feminine principle represents the cyclical, intuitive, synthesizing, formative, nourishing aspect with its emphasis on the riches of the unconscious, both personal and collective, and on relatedness. In human terms, these two principles can be said to correspond to the left brain and right brain functions, respectively. Again, I have a huge problem with this. I mean, and this is not about being all male or all female, but, you know, I have a huge problem with coding male as logical or rational and female as not that. Even if you portray the not that as a positive thing, it's just, you know, I mean, I am very emotional, but I'm also very logical and rational. And it just, I don't like feeling like that's wrong for my gender. Oh yeah, they also on this other page say, women tend to be more instinctively aware of spiritual continuity, regardless of official dogma, than men. What? Really? Can we have some evidence here? Like... Yes, they talk a lot about God functions and goddess functions. And probably the most offensive one is in The Witch's Goddess, where they talk in great detail about the animus and the anima. Where's that? 58. Okay. So yeah, what do we have here? The anima, briefly, is a man's buried feminine aspect, and the animus is a woman's buried masculine aspect. Either if unacknowledged can turn apparently malignant. Healthy integration of the animus or anima with the rest of the psyche is a major aim of Jungian therapy. Should be of occult self-development. And they talk about the yin-yang symbol that has a white spot in the black area and a black spot in the white area, and that's all well and good. And then they talk about pagan belief in reincarnation and how people theoretically would reincarnate as both male and female and so have aspects of both inside of them, which is again great. It says the temporary personality which it assumes, either male or female, then a man's total self plus personality must include the feminine aspect and of his individuality temporarily unemphasized in a male incarnation because the main work of that incarnation centers rightly on the male aspect. Similarly, the masculine aspect of an individual is temporarily unemphasized in a female incarnation. This is as it should be, of course. I'm not making that up, it literally says that. Male and female incarnations are constructive steps in the evolution of the individual and contribute constructively to the overall cosmic evolutionary process. But the degree of advancement of a human individuality in any one incarnation is measured by the amount of fruitful communication between the personality. From the individuality we learn by broadening its experience, and the personality for which the individual is a unique source of nourishment. So the anima or animus, in fact, is the temporarily unemphasized aspect of any one human's total self, and a healthy recognition and integration of it are essential to the development of that total self. It must be neither suppressed, in which case it will fester and cause trouble, nor allowed to overwhelm the natural emphasis of a particular incarnation, in which case the personality will become distorted, in psychological terms, neurotic or psychotic. And certainly no pagan, with his or her organic view of the cosmos, should allow either to happen. Yeah. Tell me how fucking pissed I am right now. Basically, this is saying it's your duty to accept the body you were born in. And if that body assigns you a gender that doesn't suit you, well, that's too bad. You just have to fucking suck it up and deal with it because it's your karma. And you're bad and neurotic and messed up if you do not, accept the primary gender role that you've been given. This is paganism? This is the religion I joined because it was supposed to be liberating for me? Really? Come on, people. Really? I don't even... the whole thing about how you have to listen to your animus or anima and blah, 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 that's all fine. I totally agree with that. I listen to my anima a lot. But here's the thing. I have an anima. I don't have an animus. Because the quote masculine aspect, the polarity that they have chosen to code as masculine, is my primary personality. And I have feminine coded aspects of my personality that are the more deeper buried part that I guess I would identify as my anima, which speaks to me sometimes. And sometimes I listen to it. Maybe not quite as much as I should, but the point is, but there, basically that whole passage is saying that I am a horrible, bad, imbalanced person because I am not accepting the primary female self that I was given. Seriously. Fuck you, Ferraris. Fuck you all. Yeah. And then, and this is no different than like bioscience or Christian groups that say, well, women have to be subordinate and have babies because that's what God wants. Here's the thing. I can complain about that all I want, but I'm not going to spare my own religion either, because there are some sects of paganism, apparently this one, that basically does the same goddamn thing. So they both books start off with this section of several chapters that describe the different god and goddess aspects. Goddess aspects that they look at: the Earth Mother, the Bright and Dark Mother, the Menstruating Goddess, the Triple Goddess, which Maiden Mother Crone is kind of marked by her life cycle as defined by her menstrual cycle. The Moon Goddess, again, related to very similar things. And those are pretty much all the aspects that they explore there. And then they talk a little bit about, like, how Christianity relates to all of this and everything. Whereas, for the god, they look at the sun and lover, the time-measuring god, the sun god, the wisdom god, the vegetation god, the war god, the craftsman god, the horned god, the oak king and the holly king, the sacrificed god, and the underworld god. So, all of the major goddess features they look at are related to female biology. They are about women menstruating or giving birth. Earth Mother is about birth and fertility, and the Bright and Dark Mother and like the Menstruating Goddess is about women going through these monthly cycles. Moon Goddess is similar to that. And the Triple Goddess, the Maiden Mother Crone, is like the life cycle of a woman from menarche through menopause, basically. All of these different aspects of the goddess are related to her biological function as a woman, as if that is what makes someone a woman. Oh yeah, and they have this charming statement in the chapter on the Triple Goddess. The female aspect of divinity, as of humanity, is, as we saw, cyclical, seductive, nourishing, and counseling by turns and simultaneously. Every fulfilled, self-aware woman knows this of herself, if only intuitively. So first of all, this is not allowing a woman to choose to be celibate, to choose to not exercise her sexuality. Because if she's fulfilled and self-aware, she will be seductive. It is not allowing a woman to choose a route away from motherhood, whether real or symbolic. she must be nurturing? Like, what if she doesn't want one of those things to be an aspect of her life? What if she wants to be celibate? What if she wants to be child-free? Apparently, she's not fulfilled and self-aware then. However, some of the, things in the God form, being the sun, or to a certain extent being the nature deity or something, are kind of more biological related. But a lot of them are about things that, that are human created, that humans choose to do. Count time, do crafts, make war, be wise. These are not about biological functions. These are about human abilities that individuals choose to develop. There is nothing about that in the Goddess book. And the thing that really annoys me about that is that this is not what actual pagan cultures believed. This is what the Farrars believe, perhaps with Gardnerian influence, that they're producing. There are wisdom goddesses in a lot of cultures. There are war goddesses. There are craft goddesses. There are underworld goddesses. There are goddesses that have lots of functions that don't have to do with their biological plumbing in a lot of different cultures. And in these books, those figures are either just not mentioned, they're like mentioned really briefly and you move on from them, or their emphasis is shifted to make them seem more like the idea of goddess function that the Farrars want to talk about. And this is another thing that I think is really fucking hypocritical in here. That is, and I did a presentation at my city's Pagan Pride event last year about gender roles and paganism and stuff. And when I did a lot of research about this, I discovered this thing called the Apollo conspiracy, which is that when people started restudying mythology a lot, in the 1800s, they gravitated to the specific gender images of deities that matched their values and kind of promoted those and downgraded or reinterpreted other ones. And this created a lot of misinformation that was absorbed whole scale by the early stages of the modern pagan revival. And that would be one thing. But when I read this, I feel kind of like the Farrars aren't just unaware of this. They're kind of doing it deliberately because they mention things and then they go and change it. So, for example, they talk about how one of the big classical things, or not classical, but I mean, it is in classical mythology, but in a lot of things, is that the earth is a goddess, the Earth Mother, and then the Sky Father is a god. This is true in a lot of cultures. It's not true in every culture. For example, Egypt has a sky goddess and an earth god. And they say, oh, well, you see, in Egypt the thing was that most of the land is desert, which is not fertile. So therefore it makes sense that the earth wouldn't be a goddess. They viewed the earth as everything except for the fertile Nile Valley, which was different and coded as female. Okay. And I was talking about this, and I was ranting to Fornes, and he's like, no, that's not true though. They had a system where they saw Set as the arid desert area, and Osiris, who's also male, as the fertile Nile Valley. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. So then I'm reading, and in their book, they actually reference that. They reference that. And then blah, 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 blah. Oh, Geb's an earth god? Oh, it's because the desert is barren and the Nile Valley is female. Moving on now. And it gets ridiculous when they get to the sun and the moon. This became the central tenet of my presentation, because I found a bunch of books, specifically Drawing Down the Sun by Stephanie Woodfield and O Mother Sun by Patricia Mongan, which are really great books that go back and look at the vast number of cultures in the world that make the sun female and the moon male, and talk about, you know, how this explodes conventional pagan gender ideas. So I'm like, whatever. But then, you know, I'm like, well, maybe they didn't know about this or whatever. No. They list all these things where the moon is male and the sun is female and everything. And then they explain them all away. They give reasons why that doesn't count, or that, you know, still upholds the gender relations in some sort of a roundabout way. And it really, like... So this is where they really start talking about, like, god functions and goddess functions. They say, it is clear from a study of pantheons that mankind knew instinctively from the start, long before any conscious analysis of them, which were god functions and which goddess. Precise measurement, including predictive measurement, was a gift of the god, so the moon, at least in its time-defining function, was a god. Yeah, so they talk about, they say, oh, well, all of the cultures that have moon gods, these are holdovers from the time when we had lunar calendars, because the logical ordering of time is a god function. And therefore, when we had lunar calendars, it made sense for the moon to be a god. And never mind how completely, like, offensive it is that mankind knew instinctively which were god and goddess functions. Because we're going to completely ignore all of the cultures where that didn't happen. The sun symbolizes the light of consciousness, illuminating the dark corners of doubt and uncertainty. It symbolizes the annual impregnation of Mother Earth. It symbolizes purposeful, deliberate activity and clarity. All of these are God functions. The moon symbolizes repose, the gentle illumination of the riches of the unconscious, intuition, magic, and mystery. These are goddess functions. It gets really, really ridiculous because, so Thoth is kind of a moon god in the Egyptian mythology, and he does this thing where the sky goddess, they don't explain that away, Nut, is not permitted to give birth in any month of the year, but she's pregnant, and she's just stuck being permanently pregnant because she can't give birth in any month. So he plays a gambling game with the moon and wins 5 days from the moon, which is how they made their lunar calendar work, by adding these 5 extra days. And, you know, so those days don't belong to any month, and so she's able to give birth during those days. So the Farrars are like, oh, well, this is showing that Thoth is distancing himself from his previous role as moon god, because he's taking light from the moon. So it's making it clear that it's proper now for the moon to be a goddess or something. I don't... It's like, let's I don't even know how to, like, some of this stuff just, it makes me so angry that. And then in the other book, the Witch's God, they, of course, in the section on the sun god, talk about this same thing. And they talk about how in the Mediterranean area, which is the important area, because as I've mentioned in many times, everybody sucks the Greek's cock, blah, blah, blah. Further north, where the sun is gentler, the light more often misted or clouded, and its heat less predictable, the reverse applies. Yeah, because it's okay for us to have sun goddesses, as long as we can slot them into the gentle, nurturing function that's proper for women. God fucking damn it. I should show this video to Phineas. He enjoys me being angry, apparently. So, yeah, and then this is going to be a really long video. This is going to go over because I have so much shit to yak on. And then they talk about they're talking about Mot, the Egyptian goddess of justice, which is this whole thing is completely idiotic too. Let me find this. So it starts off in this really, really this really, really offensive way. Whatever may be said about other pantheons, no one can claim that any of the Egyptian deities are inappropriately sexed, psychologically or spiritually. Since, of course, the Pharaohs are qualified to rule on what are appropriate gender roles for deities in ancient cultures. At first glance, Mot, the Egyptian deity of law, truth, justice, and the divine order, may seem to be an exception. Surely law-giving and the discernment of factual truth is a linear logical function. In other words, a God function. Yeah, because women cannot be linear or logical. Or if they do, they're expressing their animus, so it all comes out to be the same thing. But they have to be careful not to do it too often, because if they allow their animus to take over, then they're like neurotic and distorted. But that would be to misunderstand the concept of divine order, which Mot represents. She stands for the natural, inevitable order of things, both microcosmically and macrocosmically. Her law is organic, not legislative. Blah, 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 some complicated stuff about the Kabbalah. So the Egyptians were right to make Mot a goddess. Because again, the Pharaohs are qualified to judge the rightness or wrongness of gender of deities in ancient cultures. That would be offensive enough if it stopped there, but it doesn't. Because when we go to the God book, in the chapter on the horned god, it talks about how he represents like the cosmic order and the law of nature and stuff. Didn't you guys say those were goddess functions? Gee, I'm really confused now. Even better, they have this like giant index of gods and goddesses in the back. And they have one very weird, very obscure. I had never heard of this god before, but called Weneg, the son of Ra in Old Kingdom texts, representing cosmic order. Similar in this to his much more important sister, Mot. Ooh, I thought you said that the Egyptians gave all their deities the correct gender. And yet here we have a male representing cosmic order, which you coded as a goddess function. Funny how that is. There's also it's much, I had never heard of this goddess either, though she represents something much that I had heard of. In the goddess book, they mention the goddess Sodasi. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's Indian. I think it's Sodasi. Hindu goddess of all things perfect, complete, and beautiful. Envisaged in conjunction with an inert and passive Shiva. So here we have the idea that the god is the passive one. And they don't even talk anywhere about, but what this made me think about is the very common image in Hinduism of Kali dancing on Shiva's body. The idea being that they were fighting these demons and stuff. And this demon had this magical ability that whenever his blood fell out of the earth, 1,000 copies of him would spring from each of the blood drops. So of course he's impossible to defeat. So they call into being the Kali, who's an aspect of Parvati, Shiva's wife. And she drinks the drops of the demon's blood before they can touch the earth. And thus he is defeated because he can't make more copies of himself. And then Kali starts to dance wildly in a mirror image of Shiva's own cosmic dance in celebration of her victory. And she's so powerful that her dancing is like to shake the world to pieces. And so Shiva comes and he lies on the ground and lets Kali dance on his body to work out her fierce energy. I can't think of a better symbol of female active, male passive than that. I mean, is it one example? Sure, it's only one example. But it completely blows up the whole thing that people instinctively know about goddess functions and god functions. We're just not going to talk about the ones that contradict it. And yeah, they have a ritual for Shiva in the book, and where they talk about as the worker is assuming a god form, we suggest that it is suitable only for men, just as it would not be suitable for a man to assume the form of Shiva's consort Parvati. Why the hell ever not? If a woman feels like working out an equivalent Parvati ritual, she should study her carefully. Blah, blah, blah. That's great, except that Shiva and Parvati have very, very different energies. I mean, maybe if they had talked about doing an equivalent ritual for Kali, I might have been, because the ritual with the Shiva ritual that they do is all about, drawing the energy of Shiva into yourself and then participating in the cosmic dance, which, as a dancer and as somebody who uses dance in a lot of my ritual workings, that's very compelling for me. Parvati doesn't have any of that energy. It's not a one-for-one equivalent. Like, being like, oh, well, it's okay that you can't invoke this god. You can totally invoke his consort. When his consort has totally different energies. Like, why shouldn't I want to invoke a god of the cosmic dance? Or why shouldn't my partner want to invoke, a more gentle and nurturing goddess aspect sometime, maybe, if he wants to aspect those qualities? Like, you're basically saying that because somebody is born with particular genitals, that these certain aspects of human existence are forbidden to them? Like, seriously, I mean, I don't know if they really believe that, or if they're just not thinking about what they're saying. Like, oh yeah, and then the Wiccan tradition insists that while a man may never enact the role of a woman, guess it sucks to be, I mean, Fornius is not pagan, but guess it sucks for any pagans who are like him that would really like to do that. A woman may, in certain circumstances, enact that of a man. She symbolizes this role change by buckling on a sword, like Joan of Arc, and is treated ritually as masculine as long as she wears it. Again, fuck you. Like, now, to me, as I mentioned way back at the beginning, growing up on She-Ra, the image of the woman with a sword is a really big deal to me. Because, okay, I get it. The sword is a phallic symbol. I think I always instinctively knew that. So again, the woman with the sword, on a certain level, also to me represents the full integration of myself. It is a female body with a representation of masculine energy. But this is, and this particular thing really pisses me off because it represents the thing I've struggled with all of my life. I don't want to become male. Like, I know that about myself now. I mean, I never really wanted it, but sometimes I was like, is that the only option for me having these feelings and stuff? It shouldn't be. I don't want to become male. I want to be a woman with a sword. I want to be a woman who wields the active, aggressive, combative, projective energy. I don't want the fact of doing that to symbolically change me into a man. I want to be able to be a woman who does that. I don't want my genitals, even if they are symbolic genitals, to indicate what energies I can and cannot have as a part of me. It gets worse. No, seriously, it gets worse. I know it doesn't seem like it could get worse, but it does. So the next thing, well, not the next thing, but, as I mentioned, there are all these different goddesses, like Athena is a wisdom goddess. There's a billion war goddesses. From Athena to Durga to Scotty to Maeve, if you want to consider her a goddess. She's at least a semi-divine figure. You have in the underworld, because they have underworld gods, but they don't have a section for underworld goddesses. But they talk a whole fucking lot about Ishtar's descent into the underworld to rescue Tamuzi. Short thing about the myth, if you are not pagan and you don't know this, is that, Ishtar was the supreme goddess in, there's several forms. There's Inanna, Ishtar, Astarte, and they were very similar goddesses in, Sumeria, Babylonia, Assyria, etc., etc. I'm just going to use the name Ishtar because it's the most well-known one. But this sort of, Near East area, the different kingdoms there all had different facets of this goddess with very similar names. And she had a lover who was called Tammuz or Tamuzi, who represents vegetation. And so he gets killed and goes to the underworld, which represents winter when all the vegetation dies. And Ishtar goes down to the underworld to rescue him. And the upshot of the story is very similar to the much more well-known myth of Demeter and Persephone, that she's only able to have him back for part of the year, which creates the seasons. La-di-da. Okay, we have that. But the important thing is that Ishtar... Oh, and by the way, there's no mention at all of Hel as an underworld goddess. She is an independent, she rules the Nordic underworld completely on her own. No mention of that. So when Ishtar goes to the underworld, she has to pass through 7 gates, and she has to lay aside like her clothes and jewelry at every gate. And so when she reaches the bottom, she is naked, and therefore symbolically it represents the fact that she's defenseless. And the ruler of the underworld is her sister, Uriskegel, who, now that she's defenseless, like ties her up and, kills her. And then this is really bad because the supreme goddess has been killed, and the gods have to figure out quickly a way to get her back so that the world doesn't end. So one of the things that apparently really pisses off the Farrars is the patriarchalization of myths, of things where historically somebody was a goddess, like a deity was female, and then they were either changed to be male, or their attributes were assigned to a male, or a male took over their role in the story or something, because this represents the patriarchalization of myths, and that's bad and stuff. So anyway, whenever they talk about the Ishtar legend, they keep referring to this modern pagan ritual called the descent of the goddess. And I'd heard about this vaguely before, but I was curious, so I looked it up. And it is very clearly based on the Ishtar legend. It's about, the story of the goddess, and when you do it in a ritual, it would be enacted by a priestess, descending through the 7 gates of the underworld and, having to lay aside, her tools or whatever as she goes, so that she is naked and defenseless when she reaches the bottom. And I think, it would be totally appropriate in modern pagan thinking, and even totally appropriate for the Farrars' worldview, if when she gets to the bottom, she meets Uriskegel, because they have a chapter on the bright goddess and the dark goddess and how they're 2 halves of each other. So the idea there would be that the overworld goddess meets the underworld goddess, who is her other self, and integrates the dark aspect of herself. Again, like I said, this to me makes perfect sense in terms of pagan philosophy, even as it's expressed by the Farrars. But that's not what happens in the descent of the goddess. No, she meets the underworld god. They have a little confrontation and eventually end up falling in love. So we took an original myth that had a powerful goddess figure in it and replaced it with a male figure and made it about sex and male-female polarity and stuff, when it would have originally been about the goddess knowing herself and being whole in herself. So we did that. I don't see how that isn't male usurpation of a goddess function. And yet somehow the Farrars are A-okay with this and are promoting this ritual all over the place in these books. Like, almost every time they mention Ishtar, they're like, oh yeah, this was a model for the descent of the goddess. Except for the fact that we took out one of the female figures and replaced it with a male figure. And that's totally okay when we do it. It's only bad when other people do it. Yeah, moving on now. And yeah. So then we get to the craft gods section. Ooh. Craft gods. There are also a fair number of craft goddesses. A lot of them, like, say, Athena and Amaterasu and stuff, are mostly representative of traditional feminine crafts like weaving. But they're still craft goddesses. They're still creating something, not by popping it out of their vagina, but by using their brain and their hands to actively create. There's no acknowledgement of this. In the Craft God chapter, there's a large amount of space that's spent on talking about the Egyptian god Khnum, who fastens humanity on his potter's wheel. There is no mention there, or in the goddess book, except for a brief note in the list of world goddesses, of the Chinese goddess Nukuo, who created humanity by shaping them out of clay. Yeah, that doesn't get acknowledged because for goddesses, creation only counts when it's popping it out of your vagina. But since men can't do that, it's super awesome and cool if a god makes humanity out of clay. There's also a large section in the Craft God chapter that talks about the mystic magic of smiths and how important smith gods were and stuff. We have a metalsmithing goddess, the Irish Bridget. The end of the chapter says, and this is not discussed. It is maybe mentioned in a brief note in the goddess list in the goddess book, but in the main text of the goddess book, it's not discussed really. Instead, Bridget is classified as a mother goddess, which I will admit, Bridget has mother aspects. She, for one thing, is credited with the invention of keening when her son Ruan was killed. I don't think that describing Bridget as having an aspect, which is a mother goddess aspect, is incorrect or wrong in any way. But that's not all she is. She's frequently described as a fire goddess. The books I talked about before, The Drawing Down the Sun and O Mother Sun, talk a lot about Bridget and talk about how Bridget was originally supposed to be a sun goddess. And as they claim is the case with many sun goddesses, she gets recast as a fire goddess only to avoid messing up the sun, male, moon, female paradigm. And they offer some fairly compelling evidence for it, but this video is already super long, so if people are interested, if I ever share my videos with people again, I might go into that more. I could do a rehash of the presentation I did last year if people are interested. But she's a goddess of healing, which they do mention because that's a proper womanly function. She's also a goddess of smithcraft and poetry, which much less is said about. So, at the end of the Craft God chapter, they talk about how the Craft God is still extremely relevant in the modern world, and therefore we should make an effort to honor craft gods, as well as craft-inspiring goddesses, like Bridget and Athena. Yeah, the whole thing about Athena having a weaving contest with Arachne, that wasn't her actually doing any crafts. She was just inspiring crafts. This is really fucking it's like gods are active, gods do things, gods get to make crafts. Women don't get to do anything. They just get to sit there and be inspiring. Fuck that. Oh yeah, they also have this tendency, I already mentioned how they coded Bridget as a mother goddess, which is okay. But they tend to do that with a ton of goddesses. They also point out, they make the claim that Athena was originally supposed to be a mother goddess, and she was later demoted to a virgin warrior. I find that statement very offensive, because I don't think that's a demotion at all. I think that's a promotion. So whether you take the definition of the term virgin as we know it, meaning not having sex, or the way that pagans like to define it for some reason. I don't know why they're so into this, unless it's that that sex is such an integral part of paganism that the idea of somebody choosing not to have sex is unacceptable to them. Maybe more on that later. They've defined virgin to mean a woman who is whole unto herself, and is controlled by no man. Well, if that's how you define virgin, then being made into a virgin goddess really doesn't sound like a demotion. It means that you are a powerful individual. Even if it means like virgin in the literal sense, that means that you are making the choice to like what happens with your sexuality. And we see that in a lot of stories about Athena, of various gods trying to take advantage of her, as they do with other goddesses. But whereas with most other goddesses they succeed, Athena doesn't take no shit from that. She gives them all the runaround. That doesn't sound like a demotion to me. And as far as being a war goddess, well, she's doing something powerful and active rather than just popping out babies. Again, that doesn't sound like a demotion to me. And that, of course, ignores the fact that even in this form, Athena is not just a virgin goddess and a war goddess. She's also a wisdom goddess and a craft goddess, both of which I also would consider highly admirable traits. So the idea that women who express all these varied aspects, that is still somehow a demotion from being a mother goddess. I feel that what that says about what is the proper role for women is extremely offensive. But it still gets worse. Because the other figure, well, there's many figures, but one of the figures that they describe as a mother goddess is fucking Arianrod. So, if you don't know who Arianrod is, which you probably don't because she's a little bit obscure, but so the place that my sort of into paganism was Celtic and Norse. And these are still my, like, the mythologies that are nearest and dearest to my heart. But the thing that the most, what I still consider my Bible, basically, is the Mabinogion tetralogy, which is a sort of novelization and, like, repaganization of the Mabinogion by famous fantasy author Evangeline Walton. And so the figures in those stories are obviously extremely important to me, and I, researched them a lot over the years, etc., etc. Arianrod is a figure in the fourth story. Essentially, the deal is that the main character of that story is this magician named Gwydion. So, first of all, Gwydion is the nephew of Moth, who's the king, and he's also like this ultra-powerful god figure, but there's apparently this rule that he has to sit with his feet in a virgin's lap for the entire time that he's ruling, unless there's a war. And, the Farrars point out, probably rightly, that this is some sort of a sovereignty thing, but then they also say it's a patriarchal thing, which I will bring up in a bit, that describing Moth as patriarchal is really kind of horrendously offensive. But so one of Gwydion's brothers really, really wants to do Gawain. So Gwydion, who's kind of a trickster figure, is like, okay, well, the only way to do that is that we have to start a war. So they do. And then they go, and of course, Gawain likes her position and is not cool with this at all. So the dude rapes her. Moth is pissed. And he goes after his nephews. And, like, turns them into animals for several years and forces them to mate with each other and weird shit. But the point is, he is ultra pissed and takes strong, decisive action to be like, you raped a woman, you are fucked. Then he's like, I mean, I don't know what he's supposed to have his feet in a virgin's lap for, like, all the time, but they're, like, he's turning them into animals and shit for 3 years. And then at the end of the 3 years, he's like, okay, guys, so I need a virgin to put my feet in her lap. I don't know what, like, even though apparently nothing's happened while I wasn't doing it for 3 years, so you need to find me one now. And so Gwydion is like, why don't you have our sister Arianrod do it? So he goes and brings Arianrod to Moth, and she so he's like, well, I have to test to make sure you're actually a virgin. So he makes her step over his wand, and when she does, she convulses and basically starts giving birth on the spot. And this is not, well, it's not spelled out at all in the original text, because this was very heavily Christianized. But the idea, some people have somehow, I don't know how they've done this, but constructed the Welsh genealogy of the Welsh, like, deity's genealogy tree, and the idea is that Gwydion was sleeping with his sister Arianrod, and it's his kid that she pops out. The idea is, I mean, this is the take that Evangeline Walton takes on it, but you can see this if you accept the evidence that the kid is Gwydion's and Arianrod's. That he knew this would happen. Anyway, if he knew it would happen or not really doesn't matter. The point is, Arianrod did not want to have kids. She wanted to be known as a virgin and to have this position and whatever. She is forced to give birth. And she doesn't take the kid. She runs off and leaves the kid there. She didn't want to have the kid. She accepts no responsibility for it. Gwydion takes the child and raises it. Whether it's his nephew only or his nephew's son or whatever, it, like, you know, that doesn't matter. So he raises the child, and then it is, in Celtic tradition, as the Farrars correctly point out, the mother's prerogative to name and arm her child. Hello? But in doing so, she therefore acknowledges the child. So when Gwydion goes to Arianrod and tells her to do that, she's like, I'm not doing it. I didn't want to have the kid. I'm not accepting whatever of it. You know, go fuck off. And he comes back multiple times and essentially tricks her into doing all of this stuff. And eventually she says, she, like, lays a final curse on her son and says he can marry no wife of a race that is now on Earth. So Moth and Gwydion make a woman for him out of flowers. And the problem is that his wife falls in love with another man, and the two of them basically, like, kill the son, her husband, so that they can be together. And then Gwydion goes and revives him and hunts her down and changes her into an owl. Yeah. So apparently the Farrars think Arianrod was originally supposed to be a mother goddess. And they, let's see. They describe her. They said in the story of her that has survived, she appears as a bad-tempered mother who disowns her sons. And blah, blah, blah. They recount the story. Altogether, her image does not seem an inspiring one. I think it's very inspiring. Arianrod has always been one of my favorite goddesses because she represents something which is very near and dear to me, the choice for a woman to, the right of a woman to choose to not have children. And they concoct this crazed thing that claim that, well, she was merely defending her right as a mother to name and arm her son, and that's why she says no one but her can do it. Right, but she then goes on to say, and I'm not going to do it, ha ha ha, because you forced me to have this kid. They conveniently ignore that. That was just added by later patriarchal writers to make her look bad. I actually think it makes her very inspiring. I think the idea of her as just another mother goddess is uninspiring. Like, I think, I would describe, for me, I mean, and a lot of people in paganism talk about the importance of, finding the relevance of the deities to the modern world. To me, Arianrhod is the patron goddess of the pro-choice movement. Like, literally. She vehemently defends her right as a woman to choose what happens to her body. Actually, the Farrars also say, oh, this story is actually a buried triple goddess story, where we have Bledeoed, the woman made out of flowers, as the maiden, Arianrhod as the mother, and the white sow that eats through the son's body after he dies as the crone. Which, first of all, the sow is in it for like 2 minutes, but... And I thought about this, and I'm like, no, you're right, it actually is a triple goddess story, but not like that. It is a story about woman's right to choose. You have Gawain as the maiden, who chooses the right to refuse sex. Like, she exercises her right to control her body, to refuse sex. And that right is taken from her because she is raped. Arianrhod as the mother, or anti-mother, exercises her right to not have children. And that right is taken from her. And Bledeoed is denied the right, again, to control her body and choose who she will sleep with. And because of that, she takes on the destructive death aspect of the crone. It is a triple goddess story of women having, as embodiments of the goddess, having the right to control their own bodies, and about what happens when humanity tries to deny them that right. I think that it is the most empowering, goddess-affirming story possible. And the Farrars want to strip all that out of it and make it just another story about a mother goddess. And the thing that really bugs me about this, again, going back to the hypocritical thing, is that in the section on the horned god in the God book, they talk about, how we must respect nature and we have to respect the earth, including not overpopulating it. And they say, we now have the means, though some, like the Vatican, will try to deny us those means, to avoid overpopulating the earth while not frustrating our natural instincts. So they are there championing the idea of contraception and of making the choice to not have children. And they say we now have, but if you look at it, even if they were not always terribly effective, contraception has existed since very ancient times. I took a college course on this. And, the implication is if Arianrhod was having sex with her brother and then was, not having children and was attempting to pass herself off as a virgin, then presumably she was using some form of contraception. So yeah, this thing that you claim you want, that for people to be sexually responsible and to utilize contraception, you have a perfect deity for that. And yet you want to throw it out the window and make her into another mother goddess, which would be exactly the opposite of that. Again, what the hell? Yeah, it really, really upsets me because it is, to me, the idea that women have the right of choice and the right to control their own bodies is extremely important to me. And that was something that I valued a lot in paganism. And I have always really, really gravitated to this particular story because I feel it expresses that. And as far as going back to the thing about Moth being patriarchalized and that being offensive, so here's the thing. Even in the medieval text of the Mabinogion we have, which is presumably the most patriarchalized and Christianized version, Moth never condemns Arianrhod for refusing to name her son. He never enacts punishment on her for it, but he does condemn and punish his nephews for raping Gawain. And I don't think, I haven't read the original in quite some time, but I don't think he really comes down too hard on Bledeowith, even. Like, Gwydion punishes her, and Moth kind of lets it happen, but he isn't actively involved. That, his actions, or lack thereof, kind of acknowledge that these women have a right to their own bodies. Because he punishes the people who violate Gawain's right of choice. But even though she's behaving unnaturally and causing problems for his nephew, he doesn't go after Arianrhod when her right of choice is violated. And in the case of Bledeowith, there isn't... He never certainly condemns her for exercising her right of choice to choose a different husband. The issue, if there's any condemnation of her, it's because she commits murder in the process. Though the constraints of the story make it necessary for her to commit that murder. But anyway, that's a whole nother story. And again, the Ferrars want to recast this story about women having the right of choice to fit their goddess polarity bullshit. Oh yeah, and one final little thing related to that and about sexual choice and whatnot. They have this charming recipe in the God book for making these little cream horn things, which you're supposed to make look like penises, and they have like white cream in them that comes out and blah blah blah. And they're like going on about being prudish, like not to be prudish and blah blah blah. And they have this cute little story about how Christians in France used to have these things, and it's kind of cute, whatever. And then they randomly throw in this line that say, responsible witches are neither promiscuous nor kinky. Kinky? 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 How are you defining kinky? And why are you saying that it's irresponsible? Most, I don't know how many people actually follow it, but the code of behavior for kinky people is extreme responsibility. We have all this whole safe, sane, and consensual, or RAC, which stands for risk-aware consensual kink, and all this stuff, and an endeavor to make it as responsible as possible and make sure that everybody is informed and knows what they're doing and knows the correct procedures for... I don't know what the fuck they're on. Other than we're making a pejorative comment about a subculture that we don't understand, we're part of a persecuted subculture. But we will freely, like, insult other persecuted subcultures because we feel like it. Or something. So yeah. Farrars, bite me. I'm kinky. I'm a female-bodied person who has an anima. Etc., etc., etc. And my computer is about to run out of power, so I need to stop this. So yeah. Final thing. Hey, I don't wear this very often. Not as much as I should, but this is my engagement ring. It is what's called a gold stone, which is kind of like a sunstone. When I did my presentation last year about gender flipping things, this was Fornius' idea. He has a matching one that's a moonstone. Guess what this is supposed to fucking represent? Polarity. But not polarity that's acceptable to the Farrars, so they can go screw themselves. That is all. Goodbye.